In the winter of 1781, Lord Charles Cornwallis stood at the edge of a swollen North Carolina river and watched the American army he had been chasing for weeks vanish into the far tree line. Cornwallis was one of the most capable field commanders in the British Army, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, a man who had never once let a beaten enemy simply walk away. He had twice as many professional soldiers as the ragged force in front of him. He had cavalry, artillery, and momentum. What he did not have and would never get was a battle he could actually win. 200 miles later, his army would be so exhausted it could barely stand, and the man responsible had never beaten him once. By the end of 1780, the American cause in the South was, by any honest measure, finished. Charleston had fallen in May, the worst surrender of the entire war. Camden followed in August, another rout. Another Continental Army scattered into the pine forests. Cornwallis controlled the coast, the roads, and every major town between Georgia and Virginia. When George Washington sent Nathanael Greene south to salvage what remained, Greene inherited an army that barely deserved the name. Roughly 2,000 men, most of them starving, half of them without shoes, facing a British force that outnumbered and outgunned him in every category a general is supposed to care about. Greene looked at the map and did something no textbook would have recommended. He split his army in half, sent part of it to threaten Cornwallis's flank, and kept the rest permanently moving. He would not stand. He would not fight. He would simply refuse to disappear. Cornwallis, aggressive and supremely confident, later told his officers that he intended to run the rebels into the ground once and for all, that this ragged little army would collapse the moment real pressure was applied. He believed it completely. He had good reason to. Every previous encounter with American forces in the South had ended the same way, so Cornwallis gave chase and the chase became the trap. For weeks, Greene led him through the Carolina backcountry in the dead of winter, across flooded rivers and frozen mud roads, always staying one crossing ahead. Cornwallis, certain he was one push away from destroying the rebellion for good, made a decision that would haunt the rest of his campaign. He ordered his own baggage train burned so his army could move faster. Wagons, tents, extra supplies, all of it set alight on the road because a slower, heavier army could not catch what a lighter one could. Cornwallis was betting his entire logistical stability on catching Greene within days. He did not catch him within days. He did not catch him at all. Greene's men suffered brutally during the chase. Rations ran out. Men marched barefoot through freezing water, leaving bloody footprints on the frozen ground behind them. Officers muttered that their commander had lost his nerve, that a real general would turn and fight. Greene absorbed the criticism without explaining himself, because the plan only worked if Cornwallis believed he was winning. If this is the kind of strategic breakdown you want more of, subscribe now, because the next stretch of this chase is where it actually falls apart for the British. By early March of 1781, Cornwallis's army had marched, itself half to death chasing a target that refused to be caught. His men were exhausted. His supply lines stretched to nothing, his cavalry horses breaking down under the pace. Greene finally turned and offered battle at Guilford Courthouse, and technically he lost it. His lines broke, and he withdrew from the field. The fighting at Guilford Courthouse was brutal even by the standards of a war that had already produced Camden and Cowpens. Greene's Continentals held their ground far longer than anyone expected, trading volleys with British regulars at close range through smoke so thick that officers on both sides lost sight of their own men. Cornwallis, watching his infantry stall against a force he had spent weeks calling beaten, made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his career. He ordered his own artillery to fire grape shot directly into the melee, tearing through wounded British soldiers along with the Americans they were grappling with. It broke the deadlock. It also told his own men exactly how desperate their commander had become. Greene withdrew from the field that night with his army intact. Cornwallis held the ground and called it a victory. Almost nobody else did. But the cost of that victory gutted what remained of Cornwallis's army. A quarter of his force was dead or wounded. He had no supplies, no reinforcements, and no way to continue the campaign that had defined his entire year. A member of the British Parliament later looked at the casualty reports from Guilford and said that Cornwallis had won himself into ruin. Cornwallis had every opportunity to pull back, consolidate, and wait for reinforcement. He refused. Convinced that abandoning the Carolinas would look like admitting Greene had beaten him, he marched his broken army north into Virginia instead, chasing one last chance at a decisive victory that would justify the year he had just lost. That decision led him to a small tobacco port on the Chesapeake called Yorktown, where a combined American and French force would trap him completely that October. Nathanael Greene never won a major battle against Cornwallis. He did not need to. He understood something Cornwallis never did, that in a war this uneven, survival was a weapon and exhaustion could beat an army just as thoroughly as a musket volley. Historians studying the Southern Campaign have compared Greene's strategy to the Roman general Fabius Maximus, who wore down Hannibal's invincible army through delay and endurance rather than direct confrontation, a strategy so effective it gave us the word Fabian to describe exactly this kind of warfare. Greene did the same thing 2,000 years later, on a continent Fabius never could have imagined, against an enemy who mistook retreat for weakness right up until it destroyed him. The battlefields Greene walked away from are quiet fields today, marked with plaques instead of graves, and most visitors drive past them looking for the places where America actually won. They are looking in the wrong spot. The war in the South was not won on a battlefield. It was won on 200 miles of muddy road, by a general who never stopped moving and an enemy who never stopped chasing him toward his own collapse. If you want the next one of these, hit subscribe. The campaigns only get stranger from here.